I'm really excited to be here with you. I'm going to be talking about uh, a topic that's really interesting to me, both from a professional perspective and on a personal level, because I've used these strategies myself. So, my goal is to hopefully help you have some really concrete ideas of how you can use strategies in your own life to make your life easier and the life of your kiddo easier, or those you support easier. So, Raneem already introduced me. I'll just really quickly let you know that I am the director of the Master's in Applied Behavior Analysis program at Whitworth University. I am also a professor of special education there. I did my doctoral training in ABA and special ed at Vanderbilt. And just by way of a quick history in terms of how I got to the studies that I'm going to be talking about, after I graduated, I was hired at the University of New Mexico, which has a really strong program in supporting students with more significant support needs. With one of my colleagues, Dr. Susan Copeland, I worked on a grant where we developed ABA-based interventions for children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I want to just make a quick note here that just because these strategies were used with kids with FASD doesn't mean that they are specific to FASD. They are very widely applicable to kids with, and people generally, with a wide range of disabilities and abilities, a wide age range, et cetera. So that's kind of the context that I wanted to provide first off. With regard to FASD, I just thought I would share a couple of things in terms of background and how we got to the study that the couple of studies that we conducted. So essentially, we were working with a clinic that did a lot of diagnostic work for families of kids with FASD. And essentially, the feedback was that, the diagnostic supports were great, but ultimately what these families needed was help and support with their day-to-day. And so that's where we came in terms of developing interventions that could help families just deal with the challenges they had on the daily. The population of kids, it's not forwarding for me. There we go. The population of kids with FASD are characterized by some challenges with adaptive behavior skills in completing tasks, including academic tasks, but other tasks as well. And I'm only sharing that because it's so relevant to the focus of our studies. Certainly each individual and this group as a whole is not defined by their deficits. And so I want to make sure that I say that up front, but I'm sharing that because we specifically were targeting areas of need with this population. People with FASD also may engage in uncooperative, disruptive, or destructive behaviors. That can be a challenge. And that can cause some interpersonal problems with the folks around them. So their family, their teachers, and other folks. So that's what led us to the current work that I'm going to talk about. So these are the interpersonal problems that we are going to be thinking about and talking about. Sometimes that can be side effects of trying to work through different tasks that need to be done but are not preferred by the kiddo. Right now, before I go any further, I'd like to just get a sense of you all. And so if you could just put in the chat, if you're a caregiver, could you just put in the age of the kiddo or the person that you care for? And if you are here in more of a professional capacity, maybe provide an age range of the types of kids you work with or the population you work with. That would be good context for me. So pop that in the chat. Thanks, everybody. Okay. So I'm seeing, okay. I'm seeing a range of ages from 3 to all the way up to 21. Awesome. This should be very applicable to you all. The kids in the studies that we had, the participants were, one was a younger elementary school student, one was an older elementary school student, one was a middle school student, but I've also worked with people up to and over age 21 using some of these strategies, as well as my own kids who happen to be in elementary school. So, all right, so what am I going to do in this little time we have together? My plan for this session is to first introduce some common elements for interventions that I've used to teach kids to complete chores and homework tasks. And all of them involve some level of self-management strategies. So it involves teaching kids to manage their own behavior to one degree or another. All of them also, importantly, require effort from supporting adults. So that's the piece that I am going to highlight. This does not just sort of happen magically. And so I'm going to give you some tools that I hope will help make it easier for you. I'm going to break this work down into two pieces. So the first being the front end work, which is by far the bulk of the work, and then the back end work after you have things set up. Okay, so the front end work that I'm going to talk about here, I've broken into three different sections. So the first part I'm calling the pre-work, the second part, structuring the system, and then the third part is teaching the system. Okay, let's dive into the pre-work. So right now, if you can, I would like you to just take a minute to jot down on some paper or on a Word document or something, some of the tasks or areas that you have personally been having a hard time with, whether it's a homework thing, a chore thing, or some other sort of, maybe it's a self-care routine. And again, those in professional capacities, maybe you can think of a particular family or a theme that has come up for you. So jot down several. And after you've done that, I'd like you to really hone in on one, because I'd like us to really think about prioritizing as we go through this session. Okay. I would love it if you could put those in the chat when you have them, no rush, but I'd love to get a sense of what types of tasks you're interested in honing in on or thinking about as we do this exercise. Okay, we got showering, thank you. Completing homework, great. Thank you, Stephanie. That's awesome. Anybody else? Homework, school emails, home chores. Thanks, Jennifer. Self-care. Great. Thanks, Alice. I know at my home, toothbrushing is a thing. Okay, self-care is coming up as a biggie. Okay, well, that's good to know. Transitioning from screens to chores, good. Doing chores thoroughly, thanks, Tandy. Okay, if I miss anybody as they come up, I apologize. So, okay, bathing, brushing teeth, taking medicine, super. Okay, well, I didn't include self-care particularly in this in the examples, but I will include those as we go through, because the strategies that I am going to talk about are completely applicable to those as well. So I'm glad that I asked. So what I'd like you to do, like I said, is prioritize the most important task that you want to focus on. Several of you typed out several, that's fine. For your own sanity, just take one and try to think about that in the context of this presentation. Okay. So after you've done that, I'd like to invite you to find a time to observe that task. And actually, ideally, even better than you observing the task would be have someone else observe the task. So if there's any way that you happen to have, a significant other or someone, maybe a neighbor or family member, or even if you don't have that, but you could even just record with your phone what's going on in that context. It's really hard to be objective about what's happening in these situations because you're part of the situation, right? As the caregiver. And so it's hard to be objective in our observations in that context. But whoever's doing the observing, I have a set of questions for them to think through. And they are, what happens right before the task? One person in the chat had mentioned transitioning from a preferred activity like screen time to a non-preferred activity is a challenge. That's true for almost everyone. So really being mindful of what's happening right before the task that you are asking the kiddo to do. I'd also like you to consider, and this is a big one, but observe what's happening during the task. Is there a lot of whining or crying or procrastination or talking back? What's it looking like there? Another question to consider is what happens right after the task. Okay. What time of day are you asking the kiddo to engage in the task? How long is it taking? Who is involved? And are there any other important details? So these are just some really basic pieces of data for you to gather that can inform your efforts to make this easier on everyone. Okay, so this is a little bit of front work that hopefully can help you over time. And I'll give you examples of how we can do some pretty straightforward and easy interventions based on some of your answers here, again, that can make life easier for everyone. A really important final question that I'd like you to ask yourself or your friend, your friendly observer who's helping you out. A question is, are there any circumstances when the child can do the task with minimal problems? So I want you to just sit with that for a second and see if you can come up with circumstances or times when it is not a problem. I will give you an example from my own life. So cleaning up historically has been a big challenge for my kids. But if we are having guests over, like if they're having friends over and they're very excited about having friends over, they can clean up in a snap, no problem, no whining. It's done in 5 to 10 minutes, and the basement has never looked better. So that tells me a lot about what's going on with my kid and what type of intervention is needed. In that particular case, what that is telling me is that this is not a skill deficit for my kids. They know for the most part what they need to do, but more of a motivation problem for them. Okay, so after we've done some of that pre-work, we are going to think through just some common issues. I'm going to go through several of them. Again, I'd invite you to think through your own specific example and make a note of the ones that seem relevant or applicable for your particular situation. Okay, so some common issues that I've seen. The task demands are too great. So one note I want to say here is that a challenge I've seen in my own self and in working with parents and teachers is that sometimes we overestimate what the people in our care are able to do with ease. Okay. So it may be that the demands we're placing are either too many, there's too many demands, or it's taking too long. In which case there's a pretty straightforward and easy intervention, which is simply to decrease the number of demands or decrease the amount of time. Okay, so that's pretty easy as long as you're willing to do it. Another easy intervention, especially if it's a long list or if it's a long period of time, is just to provide breaks within that time period, right? So to chunk it up to make it a more manageable task. Again, pretty straightforward and easy. You just have to be aware of it and willing to do that. And then our last piece is just simply listing out whatever the components of the task are or the demands are. So listing them out can really help keep someone on task if they're having a hard time with like executive functioning, and can help make it seem less overwhelming, right? Because as you go through the list, we can mark things off. So it makes the process a bit less daunting. Similarly, if the task is too complicated or too difficult, you can break it up into smaller, more doable steps for the kid. We can also sometimes make assumptions about whether the kiddo knows what they're supposed to be doing, or the person knows what they're supposed to be doing. So we need to be really careful that they actually know how to do what it is we're asking. And if it's the case that they don't actually know how to do something, we need to teach that. So I'll give an example about that in a little bit. Similarly, sometimes our demands are too vague for the person that we're communicating with. Especially with a larger task like homework or chores, let's say cleaning your room, the request, please clean your room, is not specific enough for the population that we're trying to get to clean their room. Okay, so we need to be clear about what we expect. And again, a lot of these strategies are similar. It's breaking it down into smaller steps and listing them out. And then also teaching sort of what counts and what doesn't, giving examples and non-examples. A great example might be, okay, what does it look like for your room to be clean? Take a picture. What does it look like for your room not to be clean? What does it look like for your bed to be made? Okay, and then what does it look like for your bed not to be made? We can think about that with some self-care stuff as well, right? Like, what does it look like if your hair is brushed? And what does it look like if your hair is not brushed? This is the example I was mentioning. So in my own home, this is in our basement, this little cube thing that we got from Target. And I realized that I was getting really frustrated with my kids because they were really resistant to picking their things up. And we would just have stuff everywhere, and it was just becoming a problem. You know, it was stuff in the way where we were trying to walk. I was spending way too much time doing the picking up, and I was getting frustrated, honestly. It was becoming an issue. And I was listening to a podcast. It was called the Clutterbug podcast. But what this gal reminded me is that what I was doing was putting all the different toys where they belonged. And that meant I was doing a fairly complex set of things. It was easy for me because I'm an adult. But I was, I was doing multiple things at once. I was sorting things into different categories, and I was putting them away in places that weren't readily accessible. Like, for example, my kids have a little kitchen set. And I was like putting the food with the food, and I was putting the plates with the plates, and I was putting them away in these different places. But my kids weren't doing that, and they didn't know that they should be doing that. And therefore, putting things away seemed hard to them because there wasn't an obvious home for the things that they were putting away. And they also, everything was jumbled together. And so the recommendation that I heard on this podcast was to just get something really straightforward like this little organization set and just put like with like. And so within each bin, you know, it's like the dress up toys go in one bin and the kitchen toys go in another bin and the blocks go in another bin, right? And doing that has really helped them because it's a lot easier for them to know where things go. And we didn't actually have the correct organization and storage space for their ease of use. The other really nice thing about a system like this, and it doesn't have to be this, you know, it can be shoe boxes, it can be drawers, whatever. But the nice thing about this is you can put some parameters around it as well, which is something we weren't doing either. So some parameters could be, all right, like I only want you to take out 2 bins at a time. And if you want to take out a different type of toy, then you need to put those away before you take other stuff out. So that's just a little example from my own life. Right, I'm going to show you just some examples of how we structure tasks with the kids in our studies. So they're all varying forms of checklists. The one on the left of the screen is a magnetic responsibility chart that you can get. I think it's like a Melissa and Doug brand, but you can also just use paper like the one on the right. You can laminate and use a clipboard, etc. So you can really identify what will work for you, what will be easy for you, what seems developmentally appropriate for your kid. Just a quick note, of course, we want to make sure that whatever we create is accessible. So you can do that by, you know, adding picture icons to the text or using only picture icons. You can add photos of the incorrectly or correctly made bed, increase the font size, etc. You can also, something that's a great idea, I think, is actually taking pictures of your kid engaging in the particular activity. So that can also be a component of this if you really want to individualize it that way. Okay, I'm going to take a pause real fast and see if there's any questions in the chat. I see that Jennifer had a question. Do you label the bins with words or photos? I don't, but you certainly could, and I think it's a great idea. So we're honestly a little new to this system, but I think labels are great. So excellent question, Jennifer. Okay, I'm going to move on unless there are other questions, but I'll keep an eye on the chat and please also interrupt me if you have questions. All right, so another piece of the pre-work is addressing another common issue, which is that the task is unmotivating. And I want to just pause here for a second. And you might be thinking, gosh, it feels like this pre-work is going on forever and ever. And that's kind of true. Okay, what I talk about with teachers a lot or with parents is that this does take work. It requires a level of investment. And what you're doing is you're investing on the front end to make your life easier on the back end. And especially when I talk with teachers, but also parents, I say, like, you are going to do the work at some point. And it might involve all this pre-work that I've been discussing, or it might involve de-escalating a meltdown on the back end. And it's kind of choosing which one what type of work do you prefer? And what type of environment do you want to live in and do you want to create? So although it might feel like a lot, I do think it's worth the effort. I would consider it an investment in your own mental health. And also, I would say that it's something that you can do incrementally. So that's why I was really encouraging you to prioritize one thing, because it can be a lot of work and you got to go easy on yourself so that you don't burn out and sort of throw the whole thing out, and give up on it. Okay, so hopefully that helps a little bit. All right, so with regard to another common issue, I want to talk about motivation. I gave the example of my kids, right? And how sometimes they can clean lickety split, not a problem. And that's an issue of motivation, right? So essentially what you want to ask yourself, again, going back to that particular task that you had identified for yourself, are there ways to make this task or environment generally more motivating? So there's a ton of research on this. There's a ton of research on it with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but more broadly, people in general, that choice is a huge deal and can really change the way that people perceive a task and whether or not it is preferred for them. So I really encourage you to find and incorporate choices where you can. So I know a couple of people put in the chat that homework sorts of tasks were a thing that they're working on. And so let's consider, are there ways that you can provide your kid choice on where they do their homework, or what order they do their homework in? Another really common way to incorporate choice, which I will get into quite a bit more later, is around offering rewards and giving choice in that as well. So a second way to make the task or environment more motivating is to incorporate preferences. This is also pretty straightforward. It just takes a little bit of thought and creativity, and it just takes you, kind of tuning into your kid or the person you're caring for and what they prefer. So music is a really easy one to think about. Okay, let's say your kid is really averse to showering. Is there a way that we could have their favorite music playing in the background? Just an idea. Same thing can go for other tasks as well, right? Like brushing teeth, etc., or cleaning your room. Maybe there's a cleaning playlist. Maybe there's a get ready for bed playlist. Maybe there's homework is a little trickier, but maybe, there's some quiet sort of instrumental music that might be good for having on in the background during homework time. Okay, so that's the music piece. With regard to the checklist, I showed you several of them. Probably you all have seen different ways that teachers or therapists have incorporated a kiddo's preference as they create materials for the child. So sometimes using like a token board rather than or a checklist rather than the check, maybe we use a sticker that's like their favorite character from Chores or something, whatever their favorite show is. Or maybe it's maybe the background is themed around their favorite X. I don't know. Maybe they really like trains, and so maybe it's a train themed checklist. So you get the idea. It's really just about capitalizing on and incorporating individual preferences and interests to make the task more motivating and appealing. And then lastly, this kind of goes with choice as well. Choice and preferences is just letting there be some choice around materials. So, is there a way that they can use a specific pen that they like if it's homework? Is there, I don't know, a special shampoo or special toothbrush or special, etc. Finding something that might make the task more appealing can really help. This one you're probably already familiar with. I will go into this in a bit more depth as well. But the idea here is, can your child earn access to a highly preferred something, fill in the blank, after completing the task? This could be anything, but importantly, it needs to be motivating to them, and it needs to be clear what they will earn. And so I'm going to give you some examples. Free time, choosing what the family does for X, like maybe choose what the family has for dinner. That may or may not be feasible. Choose what the family does, what show the family watches, something like that. A great strategy that I've seen used in classrooms is that the adult has to do something very silly. Like in one clinic I've worked with, the therapists, if the child completes what they need to do, they can earn a certain number of points and then cash those points in. And one of the prizes that they can cash points in for is that the therapist has to wear these sort of funny looking butterfly wings that they bought at, I think, like Dollar Tree. So just silly stuff like that. That's very cheap. It doesn't hurt anything. It actually might make life more fun and might, I don't know, infuse some silliness and levity into what can be a tough time, right? Like homework or these different tasks that have over time become really, challenging or difficult for both parties. Other things that don't cost anything are privileges, like maybe choosing where to sit at dinner, or I don't know, choosing which seat to sit in the car. I don't know, maybe not having to do X, but brother or sister has to do X. Access to special toys, favorite foods. I put screen time last, but of course we know that one can be very motivating. So I leave it on the list for your discretion. Okay. In terms of structuring the reward system, I highly, highly, highly recommend having some sort of a menu. All that means is that there's more than one and that they can choose. We've already talked about how choice is really important, giving your kid agency as to what they're earning. Also, the menu helps with the kid not getting sick of one thing, right? And additionally, it helps with motivation, because we all know, like, some days I feel like, a Snickers seems awesome to me, and some days I want like a latte, right? So what your kid is motivated by in a particular moment or on a particular day will vary. And so giving options is really important to make sure that the system works as it does. And if it's working correctly, then they will be motivated by what's on the menu. I recommend representing different types or categories here. So not making them all food, but really making it varied so that you can address, like, okay, on a given day, they may, maybe they aren't hungry, right? And so let's make sure that there's a non-food reward on there, please, to make sure that we are, and, also food rewards have some challenges that I won't get into, but I'm sure you're aware of those. But point being, I'd like you to think about, okay, is there access to something I don't usually get to access? Is there a privilege I could get? Is there something silly I could make mom or dad do? Blah, blah, blah. So maybe think about a couple things that could go there, and they can get swapped out over time as well. Ultimately, you need to make it tailored so that it makes sense for you and your family. Don't put anything on there that you're not good with or that you don't think you can actually follow through on. Okay. I am going to pause. I think I saw something in the chat. And I'm trying to find it. Katie, I am having a hard time finding the chat. Is there a way that you could read it to me?
Yeah. Are you talking about the question about, do you label the bins with words or photos?
Oh, I thought, okay, I've already addressed that one. I thought there was a new question. So
I haven't seen anything else new,
okay.
or at least
Okay.
not to me.
There we go. Okay, thanks. Oh, I see. Alice said prevention is the key. Thank you. I totally agree, Alice. Perfect. Okay. Okay. So in terms of teaching the system, ultimately what you are doing is creating a really clear relationship between the task, which happens first, and a reward that happens after the task is completed. So this is very commonly called a first then schedule. I have examples here that are pulled from the Autism Classroom Resources website. And you can go to that site if you want. There's a ton of stuff like this online. You can find all kinds of templates. These are the very basic ones, which literally include just one task and then one consequence. So one behavior and one consequence. And as you get more elaborate, or as the learner is able to tolerate it, that's when you get into the longer checklist. But ultimately, when you break it down to its very most basic element, you are teaching the person you love that first, this task gets completed, and then something happens that you will like. Okay, so with a checklist, first I do the task, then I get a check, then I do the next piece, then I get a check, then I do the next piece, then I get a check. When I get 3 checks, I get whatever it is, the big reward or prize, the break, whatever. But ultimately, you have to teach them that that is the system. So however complicated you make it, and I recommend going as uncomplicated as possible. But whatever it is, you have to explain the new system. So if there's a checklist, you have to explain the checklist and how it works. For each step in the checklist, you can teach using a really simple set of strategies, which is I do, so I show you how to do it. Then we do it together. Then you do it on your own. Okay, so for each step, we want to make sure that they actually know how to do what we're asking them to do. Depending on your kid, depending on the task, the length of the task will be shorter or longer. And I do recommend starting small and building up, because what that will do is allow both your learner and yourself to have success. You can always add on more, right? But it's a lot harder if you start too big and then you and the learner get overwhelmed, it's not successful, and then it's really easy to give up on this. So I would highly recommend starting small and building up. Lastly, in addition to the rewards that are on your menu that you're going to create, make sure that you're also praising your kid, complimenting them for what they're doing well throughout. That's really important. And what that does is it communicates to them in a really concrete, explicit way that you're proud of them, that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And it's really, really great. Like the best kind of research around this is that we want to provide behavior specific praise. So be really specific in what type of compliments you provide. So is it that they cleaned their room really fast? Okay, compliment that. Is it that they took a lot of care in making their bed? Compliment that. Is it that they brushed their teeth without whining? Compliment that. Okay. Ultimately, the big picture takeaway in these strategies, whether you use 1 or 2 or all of them, the whole point in all of this is that we want to make the task that the person that you're working with doesn't like. We want to make that task more predictable and more enjoyable. So just keep that as sort of a guiding principle. If it's predictable, it will be tolerated better. And if it's enjoyable, it will be tolerated better. And you and the person you are working with will, your day will probably be better. All right. I'm going to talk really quickly now about the back end work. And these are the consequences that are provided afterward and how we finish up. So I see that we're almost out of time. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. So in terms of providing rewards, some do's and don'ts. First of all, you do want to give rewards as soon as you can after the task is completed. There's a lot of research on this that the reward needs to be close in time to when it was earned to really solidify that link or that relationship between I did the task and I get the reward. That is really critical. I already covered this, but you want to give compliments along with the rewards. You want to make sure that you keep your word. So for example, if there's something on the rewards menu that you don't have on hand at the house, make sure you take it off the menu. Do not offer something that you cannot fulfill. And then finally, be ready and expect to have to shift if the rewards are not motivating, because the entire point of the rewards is that they're motivating. That's why the menu is so great, is that it's flexible. You can change things out as a person's tastes change, or as they mature, or as they get sick of something. Here are some don'ts. Please do not change the plan, either intentionally or unintentionally, without giving advanced warning. The whole point of this is to provide as much predictability as possible. And it really undercuts the whole thing if you are changing it up a lot. Again, don't assume that the same rewards you start with will always continue working. So we've already covered that. And then please be sure not to taper rewards too fast. It may seem that, wow, gosh, this is working so well. And now they're doing what, they're cleaning their room without a problem. They don't need the rewards. Well, that's not actually true. It's possible to taper the rewards off, but you do need to do it really intentionally and slowly. Otherwise, the system will backfire on you. Okay, I'm going to finish up by talking about essentially tracking how it's going. So you've taken quite a bit of time, if you do any of this, to set things up for yourself on the front end. You've done this front end work. I really encourage you to track how it's going by taking a little data, but only do it in a way that's easy for you. This can look different for everybody, but I recommend only taking data on the very most important aspects of the task. So, if the task is, I don't know, showering or brushing teeth or whatever, and if it's a meltdown each time, then what I would recommend you do is take data on days in which the task is completed without a meltdown, right? Or if it's a morning routine, maybe they have a really hard time completing their morning routine in a reasonable amount of time. In that case, the data you're taking is the amount of time from waking up until the routine is finished, or whatever makes sense. You can use just a really simple calendar for this and just jot down the amount of time on there. You can, use your phone. There's tons of data apps out there too, but whatever it is that you do, I really recommend that you make it as easy for yourself as possible. And really remember that the whole point is that you are wanting to see, ultimately, is this working or not? So if you forget a day or whatever, don't beat yourself up, just get back to it. And ultimately what you'd like to see is a trend that can make you feel good about, wow, we've actually made progress. The data is helpful because it helps you recognize the progress that you have made and doesn't allow you just to acclimate to the new normal, but really you could look back and take stock and appreciate, wow, it used to be that my kid would have a meltdown like 6 out of 7 days around showering. And now we're down to like 2 out of 7 days. That's a big deal. So you want to make sure that you can actually like stop and appreciate the gains that your child is making and that you are making. See, lastly, I really encourage you to understand that this will be a process of trial and error. You should expect to make changes to the system that you create. And I'll give you just a couple examples. Might be that tasks need to be broken down further, like you thought it was clear what you wanted them to do, but actually it's still a little too complicated. We need to break it down further. Or maybe you created a system that was too complicated for yourself to keep up with, in which case you have to go back to the drawing board a little bit and make it a simpler system. This is an example from my home. My kids, Maggie and Katie, really like this chart. The chore that we prioritized was keeping their rooms clean, because that, for a variety of reasons, has been hard for them. So you can see bed made and floor clean are the 2 areas, and they get a star if it is completed by the end of the night. So we have a whole system there. You know, Katie helped us pick out the dry erase board we found somewhere. They like using different colored markers. So those are just some little things that have helped over time to make this system stick for us. You can see that Maggie missed a star, and that's fine. So we worked through some things where she decided she didn't want to participate. And so, you know, those are some things to be aware of as well. Like sometimes the motivation will shift or wane, and you have to kind of respond to that in order to ensure that the system keeps working. Okay. Just to wrap up, like I talked about, all of these components involve, or all these systems involve some level of self-management for the learner. And I just wanted to touch on what I think are the benefits of self-management generally. So first is that the child or the person learns important skills and gains confidence. Like they're doing some things that they hadn't been doing before, and they know that they're capable of that. A second key is that the dynamic changes. And this is something that I saw in the studies that I conducted with the families of kids with FASD. So it really went from an environment of nagging and fighting and a really adversarial parental relationship to one of improved communication and greater mutual respect. And that was something we didn't anticipate and was really huge for these families. And then lastly, the tasks that are important to get done are actually getting done without people having meltdowns or breakdowns. So those are the benefits that I wanted to share with you. Here are some references that I'm happy to, I'll send the slides, make sure you all have these available.